can also see.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
That was the water.
Sweet. I think we're live. We're ready to rock.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hey, everybody. Spencer Plussel and
Ryan
von
Bergen.
Nice. Here from Media Junction. I'm the brand manager, creative director. We are going to be talking today about tips and trends in the user experience and design landscape. We're going to be talking about some of the things that have happened in the past in 2017, moving forward into 2018, and just kind of having a casual conversation around that. You have to remember as well, as we are live here, if you have any questions or comments or anything you want to know up front, jump into the commentary on Facebook Live. And for anybody that's following along on Twitter, we are using the hashtag LiveMJ if you do have any questions or comments there.
Or any comments about Michael Jackson.
Right. We found that interesting, that MJ Live MJ, Media Junction is our MJ, seems very fitting, is also focused a lot around Michael Jackson. But that's not the topic of conversation today.
Not today.
So Live MJ is a hashtag we are using now, just in case. So,
all right,
let's dive right in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that Ryan and I have been discussing here recently about kind of what the landscape looked like for design and UX in 2017, and now both moving into then 2018, kind of what that looks like and what kind of ideas we have surrounding a lot of the things that we do here at Media Junction, from UX and site builds, as well as some of our marketing efforts that we're putting forth, and how those things are kind of syncing together.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of forward momentum is the theme over the last few years. One little nugget of an idea, I think, is turning into a big machine that's moving forward. So a lot of things that we saw in 2017, I think, are things that we're going to keep seeing gain traction in 2018.
Yeah. Can you give me some examples of those?
I sure can.
Nice.
Big things are AI. I think, obviously, chatbots are unstoppable at the moment. I think there are always going to be newer and newer ideas revolving around AI.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the voice UI is definitely an emerging thing with like the smart speakers and access to all of that stuff, access to the internet just using your voice.
Yep.
Is there a way that we can translate that into a website experience?
One of the things that I was thinking, or was very top of mind when people keep saying AI, is asking ourselves the question of why. Making sure it's purposeful. Think about like 5, 10, easily 10 years ago when people said, I need an app.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think
I need a separate website for mobile.
I'm not sure if people ask themselves necessarily why they needed an app. They just thought they needed one because everybody's doing it. So same thing with AI. I think that's a question of like making sure you understand, not just like, oh, we need AI, some form of it, whatever it might be. We need it because we have to have it.
Yeah.
I think the question has to become, once again, why? Why do I need it? How is it going to help my user? How is it going to help us as a company, organization, brand, whatever that might look like?
Yeah. I think that's something that we get into a lot with clients. They'll say like, "Oh, hey, I saw this cool thing."
Yeah.
Several years ago, it was anything that Apple would put on their website, right? They'd be like, "Oh, I saw this on Apple," and then we'd have to say, "Cool, but why?"
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing with a lot of these emerging trends.
Yeah, these trends, these emerging technologies. But that's weird that I even say emerging technologies, because like AI is not something that's new.
No.
And I think
it's more popular. It's gained steam with the Echo and Home, and being able to just say, "Hey Siri," or "Okay Google."
Yeah.
That easy trigger.
Yep.
And the more conversational it gets, the more it recognizes little things. I've got a Google Home, and I can talk pretty softly to it, and it will pipe up and say, okay.
Like we were just literally sitting at this table right behind us earlier today having a meeting, and we were joking about like, hey, Alexa, and there's an Alexa studio in the other room, and the person in the room, Anthony, was in the other room, and he's like, hey, you guys are triggering my Alexa right now?
Yeah. It's a little scary how smart that stuff is. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, does it make sense for your business, for your goals?
And ensuring that it's not just becoming another buzzword, right?
Right.
Look at it from, go back to the why. Know what AI means for you or the industry you're working in, and how it can help advance or, create efficiencies within whatever industry or whatever company you're working for, or whatever use of specific technologies within the AI blanket or umbrella that you're using to help solve problems.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty big one. I don't know that we're going to see that till maybe near the end of 2018, but it's definitely something that if you look at even the what consumers are looking at, that's AI is a big thing that people are going to want to see more of.
Component of it.
I think from the marketing space, it's going to take a little bit of time to gain traction, but I think we'll start to see that near the end of 2018.
Yeah, totally agree.
Bold prediction.
Within that realm, I think you kind of touched on a few things like voice and chatbots being that, what are they? What is it like? Invisible interfaces, if you will.
Yeah.
I think then the next topic of conversation we could go into is more along the lines of branding and what a UX designer might mean for the landscape in 2018. Along the lines of branding, we've become so accustomed to over the years that it's more or less like the look, the feel, the logo, the visual.
The logo, that's what most people go to.
Right.
Colors.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then us having that conversation, bringing in some of that AI conversation, some of that chat and or voice or chat bots conversation into the realm of branding, such as I've written down here some ideas of like personality, actions, responsiveness, motion, gestures. Like think about gestures becoming part of your brand, how you move your hands, how you have recognition for certain elements within your whole brand portfolio, that it's not just about making a guideline that comes down to this is how things look, this is how my logo looks on different things, but like I can't give a hypothetical.
It's sound. It's the brand's voice.
Right.
The brand is we start to humanize the brand more. I think that's something we've been seeing over the last few years is that idea of it's not just the logo, it's not just colors or typography. It's more than that, and I think that goes into this whole idea of for a really long time everything was all based on the algorithm and like how can we create this thing using machine learning, and I think we've started to use that still, but recede from that idea of, just let the machine do it and try and bring in that human element again. And I think that's where chatbots are really can own that space. Is it's a machine, it's not a person,
right?
But being able to develop what your company voice is. How are you a conversational tone? Are you are you more buttoned up and clinical, for lack of a better term?
Sure.
I think that's a big idea that I think marketers especially need to continue to run with, is developing that, not just the look and feel, but the sound.
Yep.
And the tone.
And the personality. As you use the word humanize. That's something that's, once again, that's not a new thing, right? It's like brands are having to become more like an actual human being as consumers and users of products and services become more accustomed to brands being in tune to them and their wants and their needs.
Yeah.
I think it's going to have a whole different implication upon what your brand actually means to that specific or your specific audience, or even, actually, funny as I'm saying that, looking at not just specific audiences that you're actually going after, but looking at audiences you're not going after.
Yeah.
And making sure that the voice or, once again, gestures or the personality that you're putting forth, you're actually looking at the opposition as well, attracting the right consumers to your brand.
I think that that's going to solidify even more in 2018 is the idea of creating these little pockets around the internet and around your specific business, and you don't need to worry about these people over here. They don't fit into this idea of this is your ideal customer. Right. You can completely ignore them. I think, even a few years ago, it was like, all these people, we got to make everything for them and everyone. Right. And now it's like, no, bring it. Yeah. Simplify, focus in on that thing.
And then you'll create a more tailored, personalized experience for that subset of individual instead of trying to be more blanketed.
I think that makes it easier to be able to talk to them and decide, well, how does that person want to be treated?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Nice. All right. So we've discussed some AI ideas, infusing into overarching branding. Oh, the one thing that I had brought up there was branding, and then the landscape of UX design, like the position, if you will, of a UX designer, and what that kind of means. I think just before we jumped on live here, we kind of were talking about the idea of what it means to be a UX designer and how that person has to think a little differently. Not that they haven't had to think a little differently ever before, but I think the box in of UX and then designer after it is the word designer might think, once again, look, feel, design. Yeah. It needs to be a step further than that.
I think that that's definitely something that, I think that's a lesson that is hard to learn for designers.
Sure.
And I think it's definitely where the industry is going in terms of design, is being able to understand, not just like, ooh, can I make this look pretty? Or I can make this, I can take this brand and I can put it over here and make it look nice. But it's not about that anymore. I think that's part of it.
Of course.
That's definitely a skill set.
You always have a piece of that.
Because design, good design versus bad design can definitely separate a business from a competitor, right?
Yep.
But I think what makes good design is being able to understand business goals, who that business is, who their key personas are, being able to get embedded into that business and understand their goals.
How user experience leads to things such as, if you're in the right space, lead generation or revenue goals, things of that nature.
UX is all about conversion. How do we get somebody to do a thing? And in most cases, it's convert on something. I think I wrote down here, the role of the designer in 2018, make people's lives better.
Yeah, I literally have, basic principles of UX.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think looking at that, once again, it's not just about design itself, and always keeping things top of mind around the idea of connecting people with products, services, and ultimately your brand with your specific voice, right? I think that's a piece that a lot of people, and we don't have to dive too far into, we won't really dive into social, social realm, but if you're going to go down that, everything is becoming so social oriented.
That conversation, that voice translates into the social sphere as well.
Social messaging, social apps, not just your typical, your top tiers of your Facebook, Twitters, Instagram, Pinterest, those kinds of social networks, but there's a lot more social integration. Think about even the communication between you and I within an app like InVision. That's a social entity within itself, having conversations between designers and developers and even clients themselves. It's a whole nother piece of a social sphere, and that all represents our Media Junction brand within that. But it might not be uber public by any measure, but it's all about how we conduct ourselves, and not just we here, but all brands and organizations with any sort of social platform that they might be using, that is messaging systems or interconnectivity.
Anytime that brand is going to connect with a customer.
Exactly.
In any form.
Yep. Yeah. Totally. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure I asked ourselves or had a conversation around was the idea and the outlook of site builds and websites just in general. From a UX standpoint, obviously being so very close to that here at Media Junction yourself for as many years as you have been, and you've been, through all of your years designing, building sites, and working with a very advanced dev team here, what do you see being very top of mind, or maybe you can think of like 3 main things that you will tend to drift into or focus in 2018 when it comes into a lot of the web builds or new client projects that we'll bring in here at Media Junction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of what we've been shifting to in design and in overall web builds is the idea of like a system or a modular style of design, where you're not you're looking at the components and the little things that build up to the full design, and effectively creating a brand system for every single client that comes through.
Yeah,
I think brand systems are an absolute trend that took shape in 2017 and that are going to continue into 2018.
Yeah.
We saw bigger companies embrace that. IBM is a big one. They came out with a huge design system for their all of the little bits and things that make up their not only their marketing site, but all of their
just
UI elements.
Their digital presence as a whole.
Completely. Same thing with Airbnb. I'm sure there are a million other big brands that are design focused that are thinking more in terms of modularity and being able to establish a consistent look and feel rather than this sort of hodgepodge. We did this thing last month, and we got a new idea, and we're going to slap that in here.
Right.
I think developing this idea, that kind of attaches to our brand conversation of it's not just about the look and the colors and the typography anymore. It's about how somebody interacts with the brand from speaking one-on-one to actually moving around and clicking. When someone isn't present, how does someone interact with that brand?
Right.
I think that's the overall. A lot of things are positioned to look at how brand interacts with key customers.
Sure. So with some of those things, some of those points that you touched on, another question that kind of popped up for you along the lines of like site builds and like this, modular design and systems, was the idea of, I know we talk a lot about here, the idea of like a traditional web build versus, growth driven, the concept of, your MVP site, things of that nature. How do you think the modular design idea or the systematic build of sites will play into maybe a more efficient structure or timeline of building and developing websites as it is? I mean, I know you've had your hand in many, many website builds over the last 10 years. And so now moving from even where we were in some of the trends in 2017 and now moving into 2018, what do you see within that landscape itself? Like, where do you see like long, drawn out site builds? I know everything's different, right? Based on the size of the site, size of the company, it all is going to vary. I get there's not just like a standard.
All about how that client's going to work.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think we're going to be moving away from the idea of MVP.
Okay.
And it's less about the minimum that you can do, and more about what is the total amount that you can do that can be the best it can be without going overboard.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So less about like, we just do this real quick thing and get it up.
Yep.
And more about, let's be strategic about what that real quick thing is.
Yep.
So that it has the maximum amount of impact when we do get it up there.
Yep.
And then how can we grow that thing?
Yeah. And what do you think will be I'm going to guess there's going to be a lot of things that we can think of that would be a catalyst for the growth, but what do you think, based upon sites as you've seen and sites that we've launched here specifically, what will be something in 2018, or maybe it can be a couple of things that will, with the idea that you've put forth about site builds and site launches and things like that, what will be those catalysts within those sites for the growth? What will be needed, or what will we need to learn in order to take them to the next step? I think down the line.
Yeah, I think focus on that. What is that primary action you want someone to take.
Yeah.
I think that idea of simplifying an experience,
Okay.
that's more about, that's getting away from MVP and more about like, let's just focus on a thing.
Yeah.
In most cases, when you're starting out, it's probably some sort of, bottom of the funnel offer, right?
Yeah.
Start with that. Make the whole site about that.
Okay.
Drive people to that thing.
Yeah.
See what they're doing. How are they getting to it?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Are a lot of people getting to it? Great. Are we hitting our goals? We're almost there. Okay, well, what can we do to push that forward?
Sure.
And then layer on top of it. And I think that's how you can grow.
Okay.
Grow a site specifically.
Yep.
I think you can, grow a lot of things that way. But
but focusing definitely on obviously having optimal goals. One thing I always like to discuss is having benchmarks to check yourself in along the way to get to those goals.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people forget. They set a goal.
Yeah.
And then there's a space in time.
We've got 12 months to get there.
Right.
Okay.
And
what's all this space here?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure that you've kind of got those stops along the way to always be evaluating, reevaluating, moving forward. What your goal was at the beginning of the year may be completely different based on what happens throughout that year. So
the information, the data, the analytics that you check into and figure out could
a lot of contributing factors.
Find the right paths as you move through it.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've kind of been here. We're going to try to rock and roll this in another couple minutes, but I don't think we've had really anything crazy come in from a question standpoint. Here's a question from Erica Hanna. Slightly off topic, but I was wondering if a traditional graphic designer wants to transition to UX design, where should they start?
That's a great question, Erica.
Thank you, Erica.
I don't think that's totally off topic. I think there are a million resources for someone to pivot and go in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of things that they could focus on as a designer going into the UX space. I mean, you could probably Google, UX design course.
Yeah.
If that's the sort of mode of thinking, if they excel at learning that way,
right.
Go take a course. I think that's going to at least give you some basic building blocks of what you would need. And then I'm always a champion for just dive in. Yeah. Just figure it out.
Continued learning.
Yeah. Get in there and start reading. Google is the easiest and fastest way to get information ever. Dive in. Just start searching for things, learning things. There's a million resources. I think like YouTube or lynda.com even. You just go and I want to start learning this thing and doing it. Start doing it. Yeah.
There's a lot of open source information out there that is literally at our fingertips. That I think some people forget that, if you have passions, like as a graphic designer, if you have those passions and you want to learn more about UX design or product design or motion graphics, it's all about continued learning. If you have the itch, there are the resources out there that you can jam on and learn that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
A couple final points here just to kind of think about. I know I had wrote down an idea. I see that like some content first still you have down.
Yeah.
Things that are definitely principles that we don't want to forget about, but it's funny how I read each year as we go from one year to the next and predictions are made and individuals write articles. It's funny the things that you see that come up that somehow become astronomical ideas. Like a big one that I read was, I wrote it down. I wrote down here like
white space.
That's not new. That's not a new thing. I get there are different ways to think about it.
I think a lot of marketers have the instinct to they always say white space, but they're like, oh, we need to put this offer here and let's jam something in here. I think, I wrote declutter and simplify.
I think the weird thing about white space now becomes, from my background, and I'm guessing yours too, being that we're pretty similar in age gap, but like white space, we think of like flat or screen, and we think about the space within and between other elements. But let's think about it moving forward and in the space of like, when I just gave the example of this table and we were talking about Alexa, and Alexa like reacted to us, like the white space between the fact that there is a voice activated system that is ready to answer any questions or play a song or look something up or start a movie or take a note for us. And there's white space in between that. It's not necessarily between objects like that are just 2D on like a printed piece of paper or on a screen. It's actually in time and space. The two different objects were myself and all the white space or white noise between us and the inanimate Alexa studio in another room.
That's some deep shit, Spencer.
So I don't know about white space predictions, but I know white space isn't something that's brand new. But that's just a different thought about white space. I know, right? Getting a little deep there.
Took that off.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. If anybody wants to jump off that cliff with me, we're jumping off the white space cliff in about 20 minutes. We got another question that just came in. What's the biggest UX/design mistake someone can make while building out a new website? Ooh.
Not building it to their goals, or not even clearly defining their goals at the start and just sort of winging it. I know we just talked about let's just wing it, but planning and goal setting and understanding your ideal customer. I think those are the big three things. If you don't do that, you're probably going to have some downfall somewhere in there. You might be successful, but chances are if you don't have one of those three things, you haven't accounted for those, you're gonna fail.
Yeah, design for design's sake is something. Form over function ideas, doing something because it's beautiful, it looks good, but at the same time we have to think about our users, the end users.
Yeah, we need to make their lives better.
Right.
So don't do this thing that is like a hidden. Hover over this to reveal a bunch of content, but don't show them that you can hover over it. Let it be a secret.
Yep.
Don't do that. Just pay attention to what those goals are, what the user wants.
Yeah.
Give them, simplify. Make it easy for them.
Don't make me think. Yep.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yes. And don't make me think, right?
Yeah.
Simple principle.
Last thing I wanted to just bring up in terms of content, right? Content first.
Yeah.
Still.
Always.
Probably always. Because that goes back to what we talked about with voice and how you sound and the story you're telling.
Right.
But I think, we've seen so much content. I think the idea of having credible content in an age of fake news, being able to provide credibility to your content is a huge thing. I think that will take shape in 2018. It already has, started with things like Google and Facebook, trying to do a better job of weeding the fake crap out.
Yeah.
That's a big one. I think being trustworthy and providing relevant and maybe not even unique content, but something that makes sense to that person at that time.
Yeah, definitely providing solutions, providing answers, because a lot of consumers, and even if you think about just ourselves, why do we tend to take to what is search engines? We're asking questions most of the time to find answers.
That goes back to that conversation.
Yep.
Making it conversational for someone to connect with your brand.
Yep. Which I think, there you go, connecting with brand, keeping things simple, simplifying is the name of the game. I think just to kind of throw a recap in here, if any other questions come in during the recap, we can certainly vet those. If you guys have more questions after, be sure to hit us up. And follow Ryan and I on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or friend us on Facebook. We're totally available. Find our email addresses. They're out there. But just to But just to kind of full circle it, talking about AI and those integrations within your brand, keeping things simple, how UX is evolving, how the UX designer or graphic designer or, motion graphics designer, everything is kind of meshing and making sure we blur those lines between those individuals. And some questions that came through about sites and site builds. I think were awesome. Were awesome questions. I'm glad you guys were here hang out with us and talk with us. So we're going to keep doing these Facebook Lives. Usually try to keep them to about one a month, have different topics that we're going to talk about. I know just back in 2017, we did one about working at an agency and the agency landscape. And here today, we discuss more UX design and creative and graphic design and stuff like that.
Trends for 2018,
Yep. So, stay tuned to our social channels for our next Facebook Live. And we thank you guys for hanging out with us today.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
All right.
Awesome. How's it going over there, Tony?
You're about 30 seconds behind.
Wow.
That was very animated. I didn't think it would be that animated, but great. That table's getting worked.